and welcome everybody. I'm Robert Aducci, and I'm here with John Watson and Greg Gorden. Welcome. Let's see. I'm not hearing you guys right now.
How about now?
There we go. Okay.
Yep. Can
I
you hear me
guess
now?
you guys both just waved, and I'm like, uh oh. Neither of you said anything, so I was like, I thought I lost the sound. So, welcome. We're here to talk about the Tharkold crowdfunding, which is on Game On Tabletop right now. We just passed 100,000, I believe, somewhat recently, and so we're here to talk about the major players of Tharkold. We briefly talked about some of that in our last Q&A, but we're going to get more delve deeply into that. So we are here with Greg Gorden. Greg is the line developer for Torg Eternity, so he's had a big part of this. And then John Watson is the co-author of this book. Let's see, Zeinheit Cider is saying I have background noise. Don't know what the background noise is. Yeah, the other two are clear. I don't know. I'll see if I can fix that. But let's just start talking about that. John, why don't you kind of tell us just overall who are the major players of in Tharkold right now?
Well, of course, as many of us know, and even with the original Tharkold, Cronod has been killed by Jezreel as a thrall. As Daryl Hayhurst, the other co-author for Tharkold, told me or mentioned to me, and I thought was a brilliant way of describing it is you only kick a dog so many times before it bites you back, and that's happened to Cronod. So, of course, Jezreel's the main one of the main ones there. From Tharkold Cosm originally, very powerful thrall with innate psychic abilities, and probably a pretty good chance at getting the throne. Then you've also got, of course, from Tharkold, Thrachin. For those of you that remember the old source book materials, was in them, tied originally to the Gaunt Man, I believe. From what I remember and everything, but very sinister, wicked as they come, probably one of the worst demons there is, and by far has the largest territory, which we'll get into more of that here in a moment. And you've got a very interesting candidate for the throne of Tharkold, if you will, which would be President Volkov, also known as the Wolf. The only person known that's been able to really have any kind of truce or treaty or anything like that with the invaders. And he's thrown in as well, expanded, and all three have claimed or carved out their different parts of the Cosm of Tharkold. You have Thrachin, who's got the northern, the largest territory, goes up into the blasted land. Claimed a lot of that part, but also has the northern part of Moscow as well. Then to the western side of it, you have Volkov himself that has claimed those territories. Still expanding Tharkold Cosm as well, which has probably raised an eyebrow or two with some of the people on the Delphi Council. If he's an ally, why would he do that? And then Jezreel has the remainder, which is kind of the east to southeast as well of Tharkold, and claimed that up into Moscow. Has a lot of thralls on their side, things of that nature, and different creatures. But that's kind of the present state. Tharkold is constantly at war. Pretty much every part of the Cosm is war torn. From the blasted lands to Moscow is this three-way Cold War, and in some ways, was that. Now it's kind of spilled over to the direct bloodshed, but you can find that a lot in Moscow, and just Volkov's territory as well. The same, but yeah, pretty violent Cosm. I think we could all agree on that. Probably the most violent out of all of them so far.
And Greg, can you talk about sort of maybe how the differences of the original Torg, like what were the major players there, and then compared to now?
Well, there really was only, Thrachin was the major player in the old Cosm. But one of the things I wanted to say is that I think Tharkold lifts the veil on the machinations that are going on throughout almost every Cosm, because for the first time it's clear the High Lords aren't working together. So to my mind, major players in Tharkold include some of the other Cosm. Isle is already actively involved in confronting Thrachin up north. Now you've got Core Earth questioning Volkov, and so you're starting to see action on their front. you've got the incursions from Kerr and the grid inside of Tharkold into the Godnet and vice versa. So basically, Tharkold starts at war with itself and at war with 5 other cosms from the instant it shows up. So it is unique in that way, and it becomes very, very clear that the Gottman's master plan has taken a shot to the chops. Something is not going right, and so you have all these. It's the balkanized realm of Tharkold gets to have more major players in it than the other cosms, which means you can find an excuse for almost any type of action adventure you want to set, because you can pick a villain from any one of those other 5 cosms and they've got a reason to be there. So
Nice.
to me, that's what makes it fun. It's a great sandbox filled with icky things. So
One way to put it.
Nice. So it feels like even though Thrachin was kind of in the original one, it sort of feels like the other ones are almost I don't know. They seem more interesting, at least to me, who doesn't really haven't read the source book, so I don't know. But just from what kind of Daryl was talking about, and just even what you're talking about, Volkov has an interest in Earth already. Jezreel is sort of the the underdog kind of thing, and she kind of started things off. So like, where does Thrachin fit into this?
Well, Thrachin, is what everybody fears. So like the Tharkoldu, or techno demons as they're called, or if you can imagine like kind of the worst fears of humanity, and then they're materialized. That's what Thrachin is. So he'd be probably, if we looked at them as 3 options, he'd by far be the worst option you could pick if you wanted a High Lord. Krenad, could be argued. Kind of my thoughts on him was he got too lazy. I mean, the Tharkoldu, the techno demons already looked at it that way, but he got really lazy, and Jezreel got him for that. Thrachin always struck me as somebody that's a little bit hungrier, kind of like how I imagined him, very cunning. He'll, the kind of a ruler that, he'll have a plan, and even if it fails, that'll still in some way he'll benefit from that. So, that's a little bit different in Thrachin, kind of more brings that, I guess just horror, evil, wickedness aspect. I mean, it could even be argued Jezreel, while she, isn't necessarily a good person, might have some different qualities about her than necessarily pure evil, like Thrachin really is. And that'd be the difference between them. And then Volkov, of course, you got from Core Earth, still a person. His motives are disputable, but maybe he is still a good guy. Probably likely not, I think, but there's still that there too. So that's my thoughts on it, what I've always viewed Thrachin.
How about you, Greg?
Yeah, I think Thrachin in this version seems to be more interested in survival, playing a long game, assuming that with the bloodbath that's happening now, if he can stay in the north, which nobody wants because it's irradiated wasteland, if he can hang out long enough, then he will be chosen by Mal'Gesh simply because he'll be the survivor. And so he seems to be playing the insurgent to Volkov's and Jezreel's conventional war.
Gotcha. So this is a Q&A. So if you guys have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll make sure to fit them in when I can. And yeah, Michael Roderick just said, asked if Thrachin was still the plotter, and it kind of sounds like he is still, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that too. Very much so. As what Greg said, to kind of couple with what I said. I mean, that's exactly what he's just sitting his time out, because he's the only one that really can benefit from that, most likely, and the other 2 weaken each other. Sounds just like Thrachin to me.
So, what can players sort of expect, and what can GMs expect to throw at their players if kind of they're pushing a Thrachin kind of storyline, or if he wants or she wants Thrachin to mess with the players? What's that going to look like?
Well, I in my opinion, my view of Thrachin and things, I kind of wrote that he was involved, and it's more of he's indirectly doing them. You're not going to typically, I would imagine, run into Thrachin because, well, while he could probably handle most Storm Knights, he's going to put himself away from that and remove from it. But, threats are, he does have a lot of other Tharkoldu that support him. I mean, he's one of the most powerful dukes. So it makes sense. A lot of Tharkoldu, of course, the common threats like the Thralls. There's even some more details in them, Blood in the Blasted Lands, on some things he's involved in as well there, not to give away a great deal of detail, but he's, definitely behind the scenes. He knows what's going on and might even be pulling a few strings with that as well. But, Thraction's also, being a demon, part of that's magic. So, there's a lot of things with that, some interesting spells, the blend of technology and magic, occult tech, things like that. Maybe even might see some machines powered by that as well, which is kind of an interesting thing to explore. I felt it was too. Additionally, that with Thratch and other threats is, I think that probably when it comes to morals, he'd have the lowest. So you could probably see use Thratch. Not all of them that they can't, but I would foresee Thratch and more of using some of the resources he has in the Blasted Lands as shock troops. One of the things I was thinking would be interesting is, all the abominations, not necessarily just the animals. That's what we explored more or was explored more in the core rule book, but now that there are human abominations or mutants, using those, especially the ones that are stormers. He has access to more of those. The ones that live there, rallying him to his cause would be rather easy, as how I've seen it. So expecting things like that, a lot of things from the Blasted Land, which can be just horrible, mutated, crazy things, then coupled with, the horrors from Tharkold itself, which we also a little bit, we've learned about it isn't a world that's seen nice days. It's not very plentiful anymore, if you will. So some horrors from there as well.
So if I were going to generalize it, I'd say if you're facing Thrachin, you're going to be adventuring in areas that are basically Mad Max meets Gamma World with buckets of blood. Nice. It's absolutely just, abysmal. And if you're going at the other ones, you're more into Hellraiser and espionage territory. So you've got more body horror, more psychological horror. So you're going to have, plus direct armed conflict between groups of troops because they both got them. So you're going to have a difference between a Wild West horror extravaganza with Thrachin and then sort of the more traditional war with the other two High Lords.
Nice. And so we've talked about Thrachin a little bit. Let's go to Volkov. And what is, what's his sort of major shtick?
Well, Greg already hit on it. Volkov would be more of, the espionage. Volkov, even before the invasion happened, there was the Institute of Psychic Research. In the days that have come, he's relocated to St. Petersburg, although, I know typically the president will rule from Moscow, but really, dived into that more, the psychic abilities, with Tharkold washing over Russia, that really empowered that. So, we explore, a bit more of that as well in the book. And, there's agents of both, because there are pockets of core Earth still that are trained. I use the word training loosely. It's more of kind of experimented on to unlock this psychic potential. So you'll see, wild things like them able to use that to maybe even, put their mind, some of the more powerful psychics, into another person's body, stealing it for moments, which can, be some of the things they could use on the espionage level. I mean, the thing with Volkov is, while he's just kind of a normal guy in a lot of senses, you got to worry about it's the unseen threat from him, even more so than Thrachin. Well, Thrachin will be stepped away from everything. It could be one of Volkov's agents has infiltrated something, that the Storm Knights are interacting with. So it's more of the unseen threat is big time, the overwhelming, kind of that Cold War presence, peppered or generously with that psychic energy is how I always kind of felt on Volkov. How about you, Greg?
Yeah, I think Volkov strikes me as a human learning to become a High Lord. So he's almost like a Vampire Masquerade trope. He is losing his humanity the farther he goes along. So the threat from him becomes more depraved, the farther you get into year one. So depending on where you set the adventure, what you're having to do to counter Volkov is going to be different at day 180 than it's going to be at day 360, whereupon he really isn't one of us anymore.
Nice. So those are two of the ones that are sort of not front and center. I would say Jezreel's a little bit more front and center. And so what's she doing now? You know, she thought she was going to become the High Lord. That obviously didn't happen. So what's she doing to kind of become the High Lord?
Well, I mean, Jezreel is, expanding her territory, like the other two as well, but, rallying a lot of the thralls, to her cause too. I mean, she understands that more than anybody. And, heck, was even the kind of person that could, kill demons, the Tharkold do, which is not a very easy task to do. For a while, Cronod used her for just that purpose until it turned on him. But as I was saying before, she's Jezreel. Was somebody that I always thought of has a lot of anger, justifiably so. She was that dog that was kicked one too many times, and bit back hard. So I've always thought of it that way. Her, gathering more of the thralls to their support. There's also Tharkoldu as well that would support her too.
I have to back up to about the 30,000 foot view before I can respond to that. The Tharkoldu are dying out. Magic is decreasing in Tharkold. They're desperate. They're on a tight timeline to figure out how to reverse this. So thralls are more important to them now than they were in their prior cosm. So one of Jezreel's big thing is essentially inciting rebellion among those who support the techno demons elsewhere, because if the race really turns into Tharkoldu, they are screwed, at least until they can figure out. So her aim is liberation of the thralls, and being a thrall who has done that, obviously any race with aspirations can follow Jezreel. That also means that she is Volkov's biggest threat, because he's in the area where they have more traditional things, whereas Thrachen's thralls are somewhat less thrall-like at this point after having lived in the blasted lands. There's not a lot of traditional thralls left up there. So really you've got, Volkov pointed west, Jezreel pointed at Volkov, Thrachen waiting it out, but getting nibbled on by Uthorian. And so I think you've got a pretty interesting mix.
So, so that's sort of like the three kind of major players that seem obvious. Are there other players that are sort of maybe kind of underneath the hood? Oh, I think you're muted. I can't hear you right now, John. How about you, Greg?
Okay, I would say, I'd like to wait for John's response, but what I have noticed is, since Tharkold is, the one cosm that sort of came out swinging at every other cosm in his path, you have the other players are the other cosms. In the north, Uthorian has already tried to counter-invade. And you have the Cyber Pope having declared demons as a real enemy, and now you've got the sort of virtual reality battle going on as Kerr is starting to infiltrate the Godnet. So you have other High Lords and other darkness devices trying to slow down Maljest. So I think you have, I'd say Uthorian is a major player. I would say the Psychic Institute, which has its own objectives, is a player. The Criminal Underworld is a player. So that's one of the features of Tharkold, is there isn't a centralized authority. So there's not Dr. Mobius to run everything. So you've got it's more feudal. So you've got a lot of little sub-power groups that are still trying to fulfill what they want to do, while at least giving a nod to the powers that be.
Are you there,
Can you guys hear me now?
There you go. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I guess my mic kind of came slightly unplugged, but just to, kind of piggyback, Greg hit it, absolutely the nail on the head. But the Bratva, apologize, I don't speak Russian very well, but basically the Russian kind of criminal underground, if you will, them being a, potential threat as well. Exploring that, we did a little bit in the book, which, was interesting. And then also, one thing as well, you've got three contenders for High Lord. The potential for alliances, maybe Uthorian's like, well, hey, Jezreel, if you give me a hand, we can take Thrach and the other together, and then they fight that out after or whatever, those kind of things can form. So just a lot of potential for, it's almost, in some ways, much more exciting as you can see those sometimes more mix of cosms. I know as Greg, as you explored in when cosms collide, seeing that there too, more potential for things like that, which, was something I've always loved about Torg.
Nice. So in the chat here, Fate and Shadows asked, which of the three would you say is the closest to pure evil? It kind of sounds like Thrachin. Is that what you guys think?
Yeah, I would say Thrachin hands down.
All right. And then Michael Roderick asks, the Isle Tharkold mix zone, how do designers see this playing out? Does this area create powerful Aelish, which can compete with demons?
Oh, yes. I wanted some of the Delphi missions to be set there. We didn't get done this time around, but so in the Infiniverse update, I'm planning to have one which tells you a little more about what's happening in the Isle Tharkold mix zone. Yeah, bad things come out of there.
Nice. Let's see, Fate and Shadows. When you talk, I guess we kind of already answered this, but I'll ask it anyways. When you talk about the outside influences from other cosms, which would you say is the biggest threat? Would the Cypress Papacy be a big threat? You kind of talked about that a little bit, but it sounds like Uthorian is. It seems like, from what I'm hearing, unless there's something I'm missing.
Of the ones we've developed, Uthorian is the biggest threat. I think, as Deanna and I are planning things out, Pan Pacifica will ultimately be the thing that can really undermine what Tharkold is trying to do.
Aha. And where can we see that? Is that going to be something that's later, or is that included here in these?
That will be later. I think we give hints in a couple of the Delphi missions. I have to make sure we have room for those, but mostly that's going to come later, unfortunately. But it's like, we just there are only so many web exclusives we can do on our budget.
Nice.
I think there's more interest in the psychic powers, so we're going with that.
Yeah. Let's see. Fate and Shadow says, I ran an adventure in Tharkold and wanted to know more about how the Cold War inspired elements take place in the Cosm. How does a typical Cold War theme mix with cyber demons?
Well, now you've got a three-way war, and in Moscow, how I've envisioned it, it's not completely always, there's war going on. I mean, of course, you encounter skirmishes here and there, buildings are destroyed. Kind of that feel was always had for the Cold War. With the Tharkoldu, I mean, it's important to remember while they're evil incarnate, they're very, very, very lazy. They're not exactly a, active species that's known for their, initiative always. They're lazy. They want other people to do it. So having said that, that kind of, in my mind, always fit perfectly with that kind of Cold War-ish vibe. And then you add, Volkov in there, the espionage, the psychic research institute, using them, for those ways to infiltrate and attack the others, not necessarily through force, but maybe stealing their information or causing revolts, rebellions, etc. Whatever they can, being a thorn in their side. That's how I've always seen it and felt about Tharkold with the espionage.
How about you, Greg?
I would say it's the law of dominance that you can establish that in ways other than shooting something in the head. So what you're often trying to do is just tip the balance one way or another, which is what the Cold War is really all about. The idea of client states, the idea of strongmen who might rise up that you can then, bribe to your side. All that sort of power politics that play out when you've got that. We're not ready for dropping a nuke because we tried that once and it didn't work out well for us. So everything that comes short of that is all those type of old Cold War storylines that you had. You could, I might be running one that looks suspiciously like a missile crisis, but we'll see if that gets together in time for Ulysses Con.
Michael says, please put a great dragon in the mix zone, in the Aelish mix zone.
Yes, I agree.
Let's see. French Torg MJ says, if there's no High Lord left in Tharkold, where did the Stella used by the three competitors in this position come from? Are these reserves made for the invasion, or is there a darkness device providing them?
Well, Malguest is, kind of sitting back watching all of them, letting them do their thing. That's a really good question, Greg. I'll let you go ahead and think about it more. I haven't given that much thought.
Well, talking to Daryl and stuff, and also again, sort of when Deanna, Daryl, and I are saying some, Malguest is still actively involved. It is probably the true power broker of Tharkold. So it's only fair to see, well, I want you to expand. I have to give you Stellai to do that. I don't have to give you equal amounts of Stellai, but I have to give you Stellai. So it's still cranking out everything it can as fast as possible. It's still supporting the Ravagons. It's still defending Stellai. It's just sort of got 3 minions now who are trying to become the better minion of the darkness device. Yeah, I would say Malguest is the most active in expansion of any darkness device by a long shot.
So you were saying that that some of the other Cosms are kind of major players here. So what does that look like? Like, what does a Thorian coming into a Tharkold sort of look like?
You can go ahead with that one, Greg. I think you're more on that.
Basically, you have starts with basically, they've shown to have some espionage missions. The Vikings, which abut the northern territories, are starting to come over, and they're adapting, sort of as is shown in When Cosms Collide. So they're becoming wastelanders and pushing the other wastelanders out. And as Thratchin is having to push back on that, which was not something he was planning on. He was literally, I can hole up here forever and nobody's going to mess with this isolated place of, complete utter crap. But the Thorian is. So you've got the equivalent of the Viking settlements and creatures that can live in that environment coming over and starting to nibble at the edges.
And so on the same, how about the cyber papacy? What does that look like?
As far as I've seen, cyber papacy is more the victim of this. The demons have decided, wait, there's a mythology that includes us with the magic to support us? Very cool. It's a vacation spot. It's so much better than Russia over here. They're infiltrating, through Kerr into the Godnet and through the woods in cyber papacy. They're establishing a foothold. At least I remember the notes, but I haven't read all the stuff on the war zones. But from what we had before, Malguest believes the cyber papacy is the first one that could fall. So if you're going to take one out, take that one out first. So it's ramping up the conflict with the cyber papacy, whereas Luthorian is picking on Tharkold.
So kind of, you just mentioned Malguest. As the darkness device, you also were mentioning before that, it's still kind of giving Stellai out and stuff. And so Zine Sider in the chat asks, does the darkness device even need a High Lord then? Like, what's that relationship? And
I'll just say yes, a darkness device needs a High Lord. But that's why that is way future. Not way future, but Aurosh. Aurosh becomes, this is why the darkness device is bothered with a High Lord. And the Gottman figured it out first. So he's ready to exploit that. But yes, they do need High Lords. They can't do everything by themselves.
All right. So just looking back at the Game on Tabletop crowdfunding, we have 473 backers. Actually, I'm gonna switch to where'd it go? We've got 473 backers right now, and we've raised $104,000. And so, looking at the next stretch goals, scroll. There's lots of add-ons. Pretty much everything we've done for Torg, you can get as an add-on. But let's see. So the next Q&A that we're gonna do is the common threats of Tharkold. That was unlocked at 60,000. We've got the poster for the source book cover art. We got there's going to be another stream that will be an in-depth overview of the source book. So that'll probably be next week. And then there's Blood on the Blasted Lands cover art. And then we've also got we've just recently unlocked at 100,000 a live play of the Act 1 of Blood on the Blasted Lands. And then, as you were mentioning, Greg, about the Core Earth Psionics PDF, that's going to be unlocked at 110,000, so we're really close to that. Then we've got some Psionics cards and another stream, which would be the Delphi Missions Writers Roundtable at 130,000. So we're definitely knocking those down, and there'll be more streams and actual plays coming up. So if you have not backed it yet, go ahead and check that out. It's at GameOnTabletop.com, and I will put it in the chat right now. So let's see in the chat. Let's see. Chief Archon says looking forward to these to the threat stream. Lots of questions. Yeah. So that should be that's the next one. So that'll be Friday probably. We'll see when we can get that out.
I could tease that one too. That I believe Bill Slavacek has designed the deadliest Torg creature yet for that. Wow. And I'll bring those mentions along for the threats of Tharkold.
Nice. So we've talked about the other cosms. We've talked about the kind of three major players and some of the sort of minor ones. Like what else is there aside from these smaller threats? Like what are the other major threats in Tharkold?
Well, I mean, you've got all sorts of from coming down the bridge, and even the demons. I imagine creating stuff here. But you've got things like chain wolves, which are wolves that look like a regular wolf, except one really extreme difference. They have these massive chains, sprouting out of them, kind of like a web, not like a web, but just shooting out all over them. You get all sorts of different kinds of lesser demons, if you will. Horrible things that don't even walk, don't even really look humanoid. Just all sorts of just nasty creatures and things that were created or even kind of engineered in some ways is how I always viewed it, mutated, from the cosm. And then speaking of mutations, the horrible things from the blasted lands, that we've seen, the abominations, and now you have to worry about the potential human threats as well. Those are the other things I can think of directly in Tharkold. Greg?
Yeah, I'd say I don't want to get too much into the threats discussion since that's the next stream. But yeah, because the power players, I think we've covered at this point that there's in terms of factions that are trying to establish something inside of Tharkold. There will be smaller ones, but most of those will be detailed in the adventures themselves. They won't be in the source book. So Blood on the Blasted Lands has a couple of those, a couple of the smaller ones. But the major ones I think we've covered.
So Craft Zero says, do we go into depth about the race, their origin, world, different factions, how it feels for everyone to have PTSD? So I guess that kind of brings up, like people are talking about, the race sort of following Jezreel a little bit, or at least her trying to help them. But it seems like they don't necessarily want to go down that road. And so are they sort of their own factions separately from Jezreel as well?
Yes. So the race, I mean, of course, most of the thralls, not to cover too much because I know there's going to be another a stream about this as well, but just briefly, yes, there's a organization, just a little teaser called the Free, that works outside of all that, their own thing. So while most of the thralls are going to be, yes, the race, not all of them are going to support Jezreel necessarily. It's just the problem is a lot of the race, they are thralls, and that's all they've known is that life of confinement, if you will, slavery.
All right. Well, it sounds like we've sort of covered the major players. Is there anything else? What are you guys most excited about with this crowdfunding?
Oh man, for me personally, the biggest thing, and not to talk about it too much, was just the collaboration between Daryl and I, and others like Greg. I know we looped him in on certain things, and I even reached out to her feedback. But the aspirants, again, not too much, but but Daryl and I did not agree on them at first. Like he did not want them anywhere near it. And I was like, it's got to be in there, man. It's Tharkold. You got to be able to play one of them. But then just that process, which we'll get into more detail on that, there was really exciting. What came out of it was birth of it is just such an interesting character to potentially play, and their path to kind of redemption. But we'll talk about that more. But that's me, and then also Beyond the Blasted Lands, working with Lemon and Brian on that. It was a really interesting. I've never quite done one like that. I've always written the whole thing, but working with two others, it was really wonderful. And the things when we put our heads together and came up with, really excited to see what the Storm Knights are going to experience, and some of the choices they have to make too. I think are going to be really, really neat.
Cool. How about you, Greg?
So I think in terms of the crowdfunding, what excites me most is that live play.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see the live play of Act 1. I really, really do. And in terms of the project itself, is just this is the first Cosm where it's basically broken out of the box. So you have, it really is a post-apocalyptic setting with just a lot of different flavor throughout it. So you can have a long sequence of adventures where you don't necessarily have to run into any of the High Lord's direct machinations, because their control is tenuous in almost every, every triangle on that map, so that you can have a more freewheeling campaign if you just want to explore, monster bashing or survival in irradiated fun zones, or figure out what you want to do with psychic powers. So it's a looser environment to adventure in. And I think it's good that we have at least one of those in Torg. So you can have just pump the accelerator, go, and not necessarily worry about the fact that you absolutely have to uproot 2 Stellae in the next 60 days or something horrible is going to happen.
So it looks like Prince Earwig asks, does the Russian side group still have a place in the Tharkold new version? Secret agent Russian spies size are appealing. So was that something from original Torg, or?
Yeah. They morphed, but yes, into the Psychic Institute operatives. Yes, but they're there.
Okay. Cool. Well, I think that's gonna wrap it up for today. Again, if you have not backed the crowdfunding, please go check out GameOnTabletop.com. I just dropped a link recently in the chat. So thank you, Greg, and thank you, John, for showing up and letting us know your inner thoughts about what you were working on when you made the game and how it works. I know as a as a fan, it's great to kind of get these little looks into the designer's mind, because a lot of times, a lot of things, you've got to cut a lot of stuff out of books sometimes when you write them, and so being able to kind of see some of the background is awesome. So let's see, someone in the chat, I'm not sure who, just asked, who's the best designer and why is it Deanna? Their name's Torg Hacker, I guess. So with that, again, thank you, John, and thank you, Greg, for showing up. Do you guys have any kind of social media where people can reach out to you to bug you about Torg questions?
I'm on Twitter at GregGordon1.
Shoot. I actually haven't even thought about that. I mean, if you guys want to send me an email, it's fine. It's modern night with a K 54@gmail.com. I'm okay with it. I'll answer whatever questions I can.
There you go. So with that, I'm Robert Aducci for Ulysses Spiel, Ulysses International, and we'll be on probably Friday for another Q&A, this one about the threats. Thank you guys once again for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
All right, have a good day, everybody, and we'll talk to you later.